let's watch that. So Andrew Tate recently did an interview with Piers Morgan. It's the second one that he's done with Piers Morgan. And the part that we're going to be reacting to is where they speak about the Israel genocide of the Palestinian people, where Andrew Tate speaks basically in favor of Palestine and calls what Israel is doing to Gaza and the West Bank a genocide. Um, I know this is a figure that is extremely controversial. Who also said other things in this interview that Eddie and I and the Institute would vehemently disagree with. But he is one of the most famous people on the planet, one of the most followed and revered people on the planet. So when someone with that scope of influence speaks out against the genocide of the Palestinian people and aligns himself, at least on this issue, on the side of the progressive pro humanity forces, I think that's generally a very positive thing and a very positive phenomenon and something that can only have positive effects for the Palestinian cause. But let's give some of his statements a watch.
Between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. What is your view of this war?
I think when you call it a war, you're doing a disservice to the people who are having their limbs blown off by some of the most advanced technical weaponry on the planet. It is a genocide and it is disgusting. And it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you fall on. When you observe a genocide in front of your very eyes, you should be disgusted.
Which side is waging genocide?
The Israelis are genociding the Palestinians, and you know it as well as everybody else does. That. Well, then it seems like your bosses are not allowing you to know it.
What do you think between?
Suck it. That is awesome.
That was on the money.
Yes, on the money. Telling him and exactly what everybody knows. You know what's going on. You know the Palestinians aren't doing a genocide. The Palestinians are fighting with jerry-rigged fireworks, right? One side's getting $4 billion a year in arms from the United States and the other side's not, right? One side is racking up death counts that are almost unbelievable, 6,000 children and 12,000 people. The other side is not. One side has mountains of evidence of babies having their limbs blown off and their heads blown off and being carried away by their parents in plastic bags. The other side has to make up stories like that because there's no evidence. Where are the 40 beheaded babies? Where are the babies in the ovens or whatever these atrocity propaganda stories from Israel are? They haven't been able to produce evidence because there is none. So everybody with a brain in their head knows who's committing the genocide here, right? If Piers was being honest with himself, he knows who's committing the genocide here. But as Andrew says, his bosses won't let him say that. He's got to toe the ideological line. Otherwise, there's no Piers Morgan Uncensored, which is hilarious because he blocks people all the time and call him out on his bullshit. So uncensored my ass. He's censoring himself right here.
Absolutely. And in this interview, or this part 2 of the interview, he says October 7th, like 20 times. 20 times. Which is insane, as if this all started, as is this whole conflict all started on October 7th. There's a good question here from Sean Moon, and it's a sentiment that some other people in the chat share, which is, it is perfectly obvious that he is being platformed by the mainstream media to deliberately harm the Palestinian cause. I don't know. I respect that opinion, but I have a different view of it. I think that someone with that level of reach and influence over tens of millions, perhaps even hundreds of millions of people, standing on the side of Palestine and calling it how it is a positive. Regardless of what other views they might have on say women, which are definitely outdated views that even the vast majority of regular American conservatives probably won't agree with. So someone with that level of influence getting his people on board with the Palestinian cause, at least with this first the sprint for a ceasefire, I think is only positive. And when we have these political goals ahead of us, like stopping a genocide, we're going to have to work with people whom we don't fully agree with, and some people whom we might even conceive of some of their other positions, ideological positions, as reprehensible. But we are going to have really broad alliances and literally just have the only precondition to get involved in this movement against genocide be that you're against genocide. Do you really think that, like, the Palestinian people, the few that are able to see Andrew Tate comment on the reality of what's happening to them, are going to be like, he has said some mean things about women. I don't want him to be the face of Palestinian resistance, which he's never going to be the face of that. But how do you think regular Palestinian people on their phone seeing Andrew Tate do this interview, calling out the genocide that they're living under for what it is? Don't you think that's going to be like making them happy? Are they really going to condemn him? No, So it's a game of numbers right now. We need the vast majority of people to be on the pro-humanity side and to fight against genocide. If he can help get millions of people on it, that's a
I mean,
positive.
just look at Jake Shields, who's one of the most popular pro-Palestine voices on Twitter right now. One of the most popular, and he's an MMA fighter who I've followed forever, right? And I've been loving his pro-Palestine posts, helping to promote them on TikTok, retweeting them, and there are all these people who are like, yeah, but Jake Shields he's been wrong about this, that, and the other in the past. I'm like, okay. I don't follow him for his political opinions. Usually I follow him because he's an MMA fighter. But to have someone who so many people follow because he's an MMA fighter or whatever, then speak out about Palestine, that's objectively a good thing. That's going to convince people to be pro-Palestine. And also, Jake Shields has always been involved in politics, and a lot of leftists have canceled him and written him off and called him a piece of shit who's not worthwhile. But me and a handful of other people from our community and other communities have continued reaching out to him, have continued trying to convince him to side with communism, basically, try to convince him or try to educate him about imperialism and how the media lies to us about imperialism. And that has helped him get to this position now where he's pro-Palestine. So I think just writing these people off, seeing certain figures in the media as untouchables. I mean, maybe like a Kanye West, but it's for the most part it's silly. When these people have massive influence and they take our side on something, I think that's a good thing for the most part.
Easy, just jump over, jump it. Sean Moon says an entire gender will hear this asshole and take the opposite side of everything he says. I don't think so, primarily because one of the centerpieces of the liberal wing of Israeli Zionist Nazi propaganda has been wokeism. Their whole thing has been, look at how the Palestinians treat women because they're Muslims. Look at us. Look how enlightened we are. Look at how enlightened we are. That was one of Sacha Baron
Cohen's propaganda points. Sorry, he wanted to show a Hezbollah member some like gay scene, and that was a big controversy. Exactly. Perfect example.
Right. So it's this angle has already been there forever, and if people are who do support these the rights of women and LGBTQ people, if they support Palestine now, what do you think that Tate coming out in favor of Palestine is going to do to that? If the Israeli propaganda hasn't convinced them, Tate's other positions are not going to convince them against being pro-Palestine. And what type of human being would stop supporting the struggle against the genocide simply because someone who has opinions about things they disagree with supports that cause? What sort of moral bankruptcy do you have to have? I'm sure there were assholes that were against Hitler, but just because a dickhead was against Hitler doesn't mean that you stop being against Hitler because you happen to find yourself in that circumstance on the same historical side as someone who might be morally reprehensible on a whole host of other areas. So again, we're not asking Tate to join the party, we're just saying that I think we think it's positive that he's reaching millions of people with the truth about this issue. It might not be as neatly presented as Norman Finkelstein is capable of doing so, or someone like Richard Medhurst, or the people from the Institute, or the people from Electronic Intifada. but it's still the truth. There's a genocide happening, and it's evident. And it's also evident that the media, the mainstream media, is censoring it and trying to present itself in this very bogus attempt at objectivity when there's nothing objective about what they're doing. Uh, and if Tate is exposing that, I think that's a positive.
For sure. I mean, you see people in the comments already. I just see insanely rare Tate L and someone then saying rare Tate W. Like, people are forming their opinions on this regardless of their thoughts on Tate. But also, I'm sure it'll work the opposite. Like, a lot of Tate's fanboys will form their opinion about this issue just based on what he said. I think that's more likely to happen, right? Young kids who follow Andrew Tate are more likely to say, okay, he's pro-Palestine, I'm pro-Palestine, versus people who are already pro-Palestine probably aren't going to change their position just based on what Andrew Tate said. They're not going to be like, I supported Palestine and was against genocide yesterday, but now that Andrew Tate has the same opinion as me, I changed. I don't feel like there are that many people out like that out there, because to be pro-Palestine, you kind of already have to be educated on the issue, right? So if you're already pro-Palestine, then what Andrew Tate has to say about it shouldn't really matter to you. But I see what people are saying, but yeah, I agree with Carlos.
I honestly, I don't think it even matters whether he agrees with it or not.
Right.
It's the fact that the people that listen to him and the people that he has an influence over will likely come to agree with it because of it. And that might lead them to seeing other content that has a similar perspective, and it might even help them, move them. If you disagree with what Tate's saying, it might help them move them away from Tate. So but yeah, there's also another video where he's talking about hummus, and Piers asks him whether he condemns hummus. Let me see if I can pull that up. It's actually the second video. Let me pull it up. So,
In terms of what Hamas did on October the 7th, do you accept that was an act of terrorism?
It's an interesting question because
It's not really.
It is. No,
It's a very
it truly is.
straightforward
Because
question.
you're the person who would have called Nelson Mandela a terrorist while he was still in jail, and one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
I wouldn't
For me to
have
answer the question, I have to be very professional, Piers. For me to sit on the outside in Romania with no personal involvement in Israel-Palestine, it's easy for me to say yes, as a terrorist. However, if I was in Gaza, if I was in an open-air prison, if my family had been annihilated by bombs from the sky, if everybody I knew had suffered the loss of a loved one, if I had no chance of any kind of freedom or democracy or standard of life, would I believe it was an act of terror, or would I believe it's an act of resistance against oppression? I understand what happens when you take people and put them in such an inhumane condition. For anybody to sit and say that you're going to take people and put them in absolutely inhumane conditions and give them no standard of life, and they're not allowed to ever fight back, or they're
But I can agree with you.
anyone who
Well,
does
wait a
that
minute.
is an amateur.
Shut up, Piers.
The plight of the Palestinians for many decades has been absolutely shameful.
So what did we think was going to
Wait
happen,
a minute.
Piers?
Look, nothing justifies what happened on October 7th.
So what are they supposed to do?
Wow. And it's the exact same thing I told Destiny. Right after I smoked him for an hour in a debate, all he could fall back on was, what about October 7th? What about October 7th? Do you justify that? Well, I'm an American, right? So all I'm advocating for right now is a ceasefire and for America to stop funding Israel, for America to stop giving Israel $4 billion in weapons a year. But if I was in Palestine and the Israelis killed my brother and the Israelis killed my sister with U.S.-funded airplanes and U.S.-funded bombs, you bet your ass I would be taking up arms and fighting back. You bet your ass I would. And the fact that you wouldn't, Destiny, shows how much of a coward and how not a man you are, as Noah would say. But absolutely, I mean, try and put the shoe on the other foot. Like, imagine if Israel had conquered every section of America except Oregon, and we'd all been pushed off of our land into Oregon. You don't think there would be Christian nationalist militias rising up? You don't think there would be people rising up to fight back to try and gain their land back? Of course there would be, right? But Americans can't put the shoe on the other foot. They can't, or propagandists like this, like Piers, are paid to not put the shoe on the other foot, to not know the historical context of the situation, and just to call them a bunch of terrorists who attacked Israel in a vacuum.
Exactly. And so and when we're in the context of the progressive response being, yes, I support Palestine, but I condemn Hamas. For Tate to situate the attacks by the Palestinian resistance forces on October 7th in the history of occupation is pretty neat. And it's true. Like, how would you condemn Nelson Mandela? Would you condemn Nat Turner and John Brown? Like, a lot
They
of these
would have
people,
at the time.
they would have at the time. It's another form of the hindsight anti-imperialism. It's a form of hindsight support of anti-imperialist or anti-oppression resistance. They can only support it years down the line when they can treat it objectively and not have to pass these difficult moral judgments. But it's been very sad to see the vast majority of people consider these liberation forces democratically elected by the Palestinian people, because they think Hamas is just like this ISIS organization funded by the U.S. Well, they don't think it's funded by the U.S., which it is, but they think it's just a terrorist group controlling Palestine. It's a democratically elected organization in Gaza. It's a liberation force that it's supported by the people because it's seen as the only way to fight for freedom that has been left to them by the occupational Israeli Zionist force. So, to be a leftist or whatever, someone who sides with Palestine, and to condemn Hamas is so weird. And when you see someone like Tate not do that, it shows how low the barrier is. Like, it's pretty darn low. Like, if you're a Marxist, if you're a socialist of any kind, and you're out here condemning Hamas, but saying you side with the Palestinians and condemn genocide, but then someone like Tate is doing this, it's like, come on, if Tate can do it, you should be able to. You should be able to draw the connection to Mandela, who said in a speech in Palestine that violence is justified when it's the only alternative, as it was in the case of South Africa and as it is in the case of Palestine. So what are we doing here? Where are our principles? We should be ashamed that someone like Tate, who's not a Marxist, who's got this sort of pseudo anti-matrix thing going on, when in substance, a lot of the central areas that he speaks about, he's very pro-matrix, like the ideology of just become rich so you could take care of your family. That's bourgeois ideology, just bourgeois ideology of the last period. Now bourgeois ideology is a little bit more woke, but that's bourgeois ideology of the last period. It doesn't escape the matrix. It tries to go back on an old file that the matrix had and overcame, and tries to bring it back in some ways. But if he can fucking do it and be right and stand with the Palestinian resistance, how are people who consider themselves Marxists and socialists not going to do it? It's absurd. And I have in mind here specifically Cornel West, who came out with an article about nuance. Nuance. We need nuance here. We need to condemn Hamas, but we need to support the Palestinian struggle. You can't support the Palestinian struggle, the long-term struggle for the right of return, for a secular state where Palestinian Muslims and Christians and Jews can live together in peace as they were before 1947. You can't support that Palestinian freedom struggle and condemn the people that the Palestinians chose to fight for them for freedom. It's absurd. It's like supporting the struggle of black people in South Africa against the Afrikaners, the white Afrikaners, and condemn Nelson Mandela and the Communist Party of South Africa. What? You can't do that.
Of course, and it's the exact same thing that it was in South Africa. It's the native people of that land being ruled by white European settlers or American settlers coming in from another land and ruling over them, and creating an ethno-state that only serves the people who are the white people moving in from elsewhere, ruling over the native population. So when the native population fights back against these Europeans who have been moving in and killing them and stealing their land, they're terrorists. Oh, so what is it? Just the brown people are the terrorists then, and the white people are the and white people can never be terrorists? White people can never be the perpetrators. And now all these people like Piers Morgan look back at South Africa. Of course I support Nelson Mandela. Anti-imperialism in hindsight. It shows it.